And we're back. I am still getting used to doing this solo podcast. It has been a really long time since I've been behind the mic. And to be honest, I feel really shitty about it. It does not feel good so far. So I'm just going to power through the feeling of awkwardness and the fact that I am going to be reading off of a script and trying to be authentic and trying to be articulate and provide some kind of value to you. So, but today, what I really wanted to talk about are alternative ways to monetize your audience. Now, podcasters, the majority of which will think when they hear monetize your podcast, they think, okay, I either got to get tens of thousands of downloads for my podcast in order to have sponsors start kicking down my door going, yeah, take my money. And the other way would be to start a Patreon. And again, you have to have such a massive audience that a smaller percentage of that audience is going to be so rabidly in love with you as a host, and not in love romantically, but in love with your content, that they want to pay you money directly for extra content. Maybe that's an extra episode a week. Maybe those are longer episodes, behind the scenes stuff. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. Jesus. Behind the scenes stuff, exclusive content of any kind. And what people don't really stop to think about is, are those the only ways that I can get money from my podcast? And the answer is no. I've written out 4 different ways to help you monetize your podcast and hopefully bring some dollars in. And again, we're not doing this for the money, but it is nice to monetize your podcast. I think even if when you start out your show, it's not at the front of mind, it's somewhere in the back of your mind. There's a little gremlin back there that's going, you could make some money doing this. And yeah, you can. So here are those 4 ways that you can alternatively monetize your podcast. See, this freaking stinks. Number 1, I'm going to use a real life example. I was working with a client this year who is the owner of a small business. And if that's you, then this directly applies to you. A lot of people are starting podcasts to sort of accompany their business, to use it as a marketing tool, to use it as a creative outlet, to talk to other people in their industry, to get new clients. But what this guy did, he owns a small real estate company. And what do companies do? They work with vendors, other companies that help their company get business done. So he planned out an entire season of his podcast, 10 to 12 episodes, and he reached out to all of the vendors that he works with and says, hey, I'm launching a podcast, 12 episodes over the course of the next 6 months. And the audience is people that are really interested in real estate and people that are interested in our specific niche of real estate, the niche that you operate in and that you need customers in. Why not sponsor an episode of my podcast? I'll plug your business. I'll talk about how amazing you guys are and how much fun it's been to work with you and how great of a partner you are. He got like 6 or 7 sponsors, just like that. Now, granted, I don't know how many he reached out to and how many no's he got, but he got a bunch of yeses and covered the majority of the cost for producing that season. And I don't think that people think enough about, oh, I can actually reach out to people to sponsor my podcast. I don't have to wait and hide and let them kick down my door. You have to be proactive. If you really want sponsorships for your podcast, you have to go out and get them. It's a hustle. And it's like the same thing with a lot of things in life. You can't just wait for those things to happen. You sort of have to just go out and make it happen. And again, you're going to get a lot of people that turn you down, but it's not going to be everybody. Some people are going to say yes. And what that really comes down to is finding the companies or sponsors or people that are the best fit for your audience. And you have to know who your audience is. Who is it that's listening to your podcast? And are they going to be a good fit with the person that's sponsoring? Is your audience going to be pissed that some random company that they don't give a shit about is sponsoring the episode? You have to consider that. And from the sponsor side, you have to go, is this going to be a worthwhile investment for them? And that's sort of how you build your pitch is, these people could be potential customers for you. Not only are they listeners of mine, so you want to reach these people, I'm giving you an avenue to do that. The second way is sort of a broader, this way is a lot more ambiguous. There's no real kind of hardcore definition, but the way I wrote it out was you use the podcast to drive people to other ways of giving you money, whether that is people that are listeners become clients of yours. Say that you are a consultant or some kind of coach, some kind of business coach, which I think is a kind of a scam profession, but that's besides the point. You can find investors for your business, or probably at its most basic level, it's finding customers for your product or service, but you're using the podcast as a vehicle to promote yourself, to get your concept out there, to talk about what an expert you are. That's all we're really doing this for. That's why I'm doing this podcast, is to try and position myself as an expert in what I'm talking about. And it feels weird even saying that. But again, that's probably the most likely route for, if I'm talking to podcast hosts as a whole, that's likely the most, feasible route for you. The third option is sponsored episodes. Now, this is different from planning out a season and reaching out to vendors, or different from the reason I just gave of sort of using the podcast as a vehicle to inadvertently get money in your pocket. But you can sell out space on your show. You've seen the articles come out that people are paying, $50,000 to be guests on other people's podcasts. Granted, people aren't going to be paying you $50,000 to be on your podcast, but if you're doing an interview style podcast, you can have an episode sponsored by this seltzer company. So this is Polar Seltzer. They're not the sponsor of this company, but they make a damn good seltzer. So you could say, this episode of PodLogic is brought to you by Polar Seltzer. It's not. And I would sit down and interview the founder of this seltzer company, talk about their product. And if I'm running a business type podcast, I'd have to shape the content to where it's still beneficial to the listener, as well as giving, a worthwhile interview to this person and giving some good exposure to them. And in turn, you're getting money. And we actually had a really interesting conversation on one of the podcast Super Friends episodes about this, where is it like the ethics or the morals around talking to your audience beforehand and being like, hey guys, by the way, this is a sponsored episode by Polar Seltzer, and I'm interviewing the founder. Does that turn people off? Is it bad if you don't say anything at all and then they find out after the fact and then they get pissed at you for not being totally upfront with them? So those are just some things to think about, but that is an alternative, is the sponsored episode route. And finally, it's utilizing the Podcasting 2.0 apps. And if you listen to 2 episodes back where I talk about Podcasting 2.0, they are really pushing the industry forward. If you check out the podcast index, the links to everything I'm about to mention are in the description. But these apps allow actual tipping directly from the listener to you, and it goes right into your pocket using cryptocurrency. And again, if you are someone who doesn't know what cryptocurrency is, I would just do a sort of a basic Google search, but I would actually check out the value for value explanation on the podcast index. There are apps, there are hosting platforms for podcasts that allow people, listeners of your podcast, to tip you directly for your show in real time. If I said something super profound and you went, holy shit, that was incredible, theoretically, you could tip me some kind of amount in crypto directly. And so that is the fourth way to alternatively monetize your podcast, is just cutting out the middleman completely and getting the cash, or crypto, I guess, directly from the listener to you. And I'm going to list out in the description and mention these now. Here are 5 options that you can. So these are the Podcasting 2.0 apps that allow crypto tipping. There's Podverse, which is an actual app where you play the podcast. It's a podcast player. There's Castopod, which is a hosting platform similar to something like Anchor or Libsyn. There's Podcast Addict, which is another app and a player. There's JustCast, which is, again, another hosting option. And then there's Buzzsprout, which is probably the most popular on this list of hosts that people would know of, and has probably been around the longest. Don't quote me on that. But Buzzsprout is also an option there. And essentially what you do is you would go into the RSS feed, and there's tags that you can put in there that link to your crypto wallet. And once you input all of that information, it allows people to tip you directly. To be perfectly honest with this Podcasting 2.0 stuff, it's so early on, in my opinion, it's so early on in this game of being able to tip crypto. Like, the mass adoption of cryptocurrency just isn't mainstream yet. Everyone knows about Bitcoin. Everyone knows about Ethereum. Everyone knows about Dogecoin and the, kind of the basic wallets and stuff. But like, mass adoption of that, and then adding that into being able to utilize that in podcasting is so early on that I think if you were to get into it now and sort of get that established early on, I think that'll really benefit you once this does take off, because it is going to at a certain point. In my opinion, we're heading towards total decentralization of podcasting specifically, and I'm betting my money on the Podcasting 2.0 horse. So if you guys are listening from Podcast Index, you've got a fan in me. So those are some alternative ways to monetize your podcast. I want to say that this was like my 3rd or 4th run through of recording this where I didn't go, this sucks, and start over. So I appreciate you sticking all the way through. Please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Johnny Podcasts, where I tweet stuff daily. And then the link below, you can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.